he had vision for putting people together, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. I mean, good producers do that in the studio, but he not only did it in the studio, he didn't have to actually, he did it all himself, but he was able to do it visually. And how do you tell a story with these particular people? Who would be right for the story? And most importantly, what is the story?
Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. You are who you are, and that was Paul Peterson talking about his experience with Prince. I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York today with a cold in my head and still a pain in my heart. It's been almost 2 weeks since we lost Prince, and it hit me hard. I know it hit a lot of people hard, and it's been incredible to see all of this footage, these stories that people are telling. It seems like everybody's got some kind of a story about Prince, whether they came into personal contact with him or not. I'll tell you briefly that I came into contact with him once when I was in high school. I was a young teenager hanging out at Paisley Park Studios where my dad and some of his cronies were doing work, and I was invited to watch the dress rehearsal for the Diamonds and Pearls tour. And I went into the sound stage where Prince would rehearse, and I watched a kind of closed performance of the tour, which ended with Prince on this floating bed flying above us. It was just an astounding performance. I mean, regardless of the fact that it was like me and the technical crew and maybe a handful of other people, he just totally delivered it as if he were playing for 10,000 people. It was staggering. When it was over, I got to meet him. I was brought over to him by somebody, and he said to me, "There's a party here later if you want to come." You know, he was famous for throwing these parties at Paisley Park Studios, and he invited me. I was probably 15 years old, and I was not allowed to attend that party. I always wondered what would have happened to me had I gone to Prince's party that night as a 15-year-old. But of course, my other story is the one that so many people share, which is that I was just so astounded by him and so influenced by him. There was something in what he did that made me want to try to do that too. Last summer, when I was in Minneapolis, I took a little time to interview some friends, people who are part of the Minneapolis scene and who worked with Prince, particularly in the earlier days of his career. I'm talking about the brothers Paul Peterson and Ricky Peterson and the keyboard player Monte Moir. Today, I'd like to share excerpts of those 3 interviews. First of all, I should tell you, all 3 of these guys have had extensive careers on their own, solo careers as producers, songwriters, musicians. For the purposes of today's episode, I want to focus specifically on their experience with Prince because it is revealing and it says something about the greater impact of Prince on an entire community and generation of musicians. It was something that I was focused on even last summer. I wanted to know how Minneapolis was impacted by Prince in their midst. Minneapolis has always been a very artistically rich community. And there's something sophisticated and also very funky about the music that comes out of Minneapolis. And this is the environment that created Prince. And then Prince reframed that environment, and he brought so many of the musicians along with him. I want to start out by sharing the interview I had with Paul Peterson. He's sometimes known as St. Paul. He was named St. Paul by Prince. Let's get started now with the conversation with Paul Peterson.
By the time I was aware of you, I think you couldn't have been more than 21 or 22.
Yeah.
And you were already associated with Prince and The Time and, Purple Rain and your solo record on MCA.
Sure.
So what was that whole period like? You were pretty young when all of that happened to you.
I was working 6 nights a week in a cover band with Patty and Stuart, my brother-in-law. Just graduated from high school. Was up getting in trouble at a place called Breezy Point, golfing with my best friend. I got a phone call on the landline in those days from my brother-in-law Stuart, who said, "Hey, get your butt down here. You've got an audition with The Time." And, I'd been playing keyboards and bass and whatever I could get my hands on in these 6 nights a week bar bands.
Were you a practicing guy? Were you staying at home
that's
practicing?
a really awful question to ask me because I'm not huge into practicing unless there's practice with a purpose. You have to give me a task and you have to say, dude, you have to sound ridiculous on this by Tuesday. And I'll be like, okay.
And how do you do it? I mean, how did you picked it up? You figured it out. You knew you could pull it off.
I don't read worth a shit. And I've got good ears. So I'm supposed to get this tape 4 or 5 days ahead of time for the audition. No, it never came. The night before the audition, I had to learn, I don't remember exactly how many songs, but 6 or 7 songs, memorize them, be able to dance, which was interesting for me anyways. I'm not a big dancer, but and sing all this stuff and go into this red hot situation and be killing. So I practiced with the purpose for all night long and went into this audition that Prince was not at, but Jesse Johnson was running it. And I went in there, this long, lean little green dude from Richfield, and I went in there and did what I knew how to do and was able to take direction and had enough experience playing 6 nights a week in a bar to be able to adjust and do what I needed to do. And I could groove a little bit because of my background with my family and my love for R&B black music. And I knew what was going on. I knew what was happening. So I think they were impressed by the fact that I was hip to the groove. And from there on, I got the gig.
It's interesting as a side note, I spoke to Monte today.
Oh, did you really?
And he told me that the first tour that he did with The Time, Prince put them in a room for weeks, 6 days a week, rehearsing.
Oh, yeah.
To do a 30-minute set. And it was all this choreography and all this stuff, which only makes your audition story more incredible to me, that you had 24 hours or less to walk in and audition for this thing when that band had been doing its thing already and was well-oiled machine at that point.
Once we decided on who the band was, it was school after that because they saw the talent, and then we hit the shed 6 days a week in a small little warehouse off of Highway 7 every day. And back in those days, I was partying and having a good time, and they'd like, I was being very 17, 18 years old. And they whipped us into shape. We did one gig only at First Avenue, and that was the soundtrack for what you hear on The Bird. That's actually us live at First Avenue. And we did the movie.
From Purple Rain.
Yeah, from Purple Rain. So it was definitely the school of Prince or Morris Day or Jesse Johnson. From the minute I got the gig, it's like, okay, well, here it is. And how you act, how you walk, how you talk, what the shtick is, because there was shtick. We didn't call it shtick, but it was shtick. I'm telling you, it was like you had to have this attitude, man. You could not be the little tiny white kid from Richfield. You needed to be cool. You needed to fit in with these veterans who had been in this band. They just lost their brothers. They just lost Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Monte Moir. And they weren't happy. So we were trying to fill those shoes. It was looking back on it now, I can see where their discontent was. I could have been the most talented keyboard player on the planet Earth, and they still would have been bummed that their bros were gone. But it was school. And they really, in a short amount of time, gave great direction. Either via long hours in the studio and or just cussing us out was really what it was. They cussed us out a lot.
And it was Jimmy and...
Jimmy was way gone by then, so it was Jesse mostly.
Oh, Jesse, right. It was Jesse and Morris at all, or mostly Jesse?
Morris was never there. He barely showed up.
And what about Prince? Was that your first time really interacting with Prince?
The second call, or the callback, is when I came in. When he was there, and we started picking out swatches for our suits. That's when I met him. And the first interaction, and I've told this in other interviews, but my first interaction with him was he wrote down on a piece of paper W-R-E-C-K, wreck, and then S-T-O-W, stow. He'd say, what is it? What does that say? I say, wreck, stow. What is it? I don't know. Say it again. Wreck, stow. What is it? I don't know, Prince. I was super scared. Say it fast. Wreck a stow? He said, where do you buy your records? to wreck his store. This is my first interaction with this guy to break the ice. And I think that made it into a movie much later on, but he was cool. And we picked out the swatches for the suit. I picked out a beautiful black pinstripe. He said, "You'll never get noticed doing that." He picked me out an orange pinstripe suit that you see on the cover of Ice Cream Castles. And he gave me that little bouffant hairdo and all that. So
when you say he gave you that haircut,
he had a guy by the name of Earl, and he gave him direction for what he wanted me to look like. It was basically Duran Duran. He was looking for that kind of a look back in those days.
Had Prince penetrated in the scene by that point that you were aware of him? Were you a fan of his at that point?
Not necessarily a fan. I was aware of him. At that point, he had 1999 out, and that was playing like crazy.
Yeah.
That was more pop radio than black radio.
Yes.
And he was really crossing over right around the same time Michael was, so that was kind of an interesting viewpoint, with those two guys. But the fun thing for me about Prince was he played all the instruments. I play all the instruments. I don't claim to be him by any stretch of the means. Dude's a genius, but we had that multi-instrumentalist thing in common.
Did seeing him succeed as a multi-instrumentalist, as somebody who found his sound, making his own tracks, did that open your eyes to what kind of career you might want to have? Did you already have that vision of what you might want to do, or did it have an impact on you seeing Prince succeed?
My family were my first teachers.
Yeah.
Prince definitely was my second teacher. Even though he didn't interact a whole bunch with me, but just being in that creative camp and hearing the tracks that he was doing and knowing that he did everything himself. Bobby Z was the producer of the family record after the time was done. And Bobby Z is a pseudo cousin of mine now at this point through, again, Stuart Pastor. Mm-hmm. Stuart is first cousin with Bobby and David. So it's a weird little world we live in here.
I didn't know that.
No way.
I never knew that.
Stuart's first cousin is Bobby and David and Stevie and all those guys. So I think it solidified that and encouraged me to know that I could do it all myself. And I think it was a Minneapolis scene thing that you were supposed to do everything yourself and put the blinders on and not really get a lot of outside information, which was opposite of what I was used to doing, as I always was playing drums or keyboards in bands. But dude had a vision, and it was easier for him, instead of calling someone to explain it, he could just play it himself. I get that now.
What's clear is there's always been an incredible collection of world-class musicians in Minneapolis.
No doubt.
For whatever reason. I can't really tell why.
Me neither.
Why is that a thing?
I wish I had the answer to that. I mean, we make fun of it and say it's the friggin' weather, and all we had time to do was sit inside, have cocktails, and create. And really, that really could be it. But there is definitely something in the water up here. Anything from the old soul days to Dylan to Husker Du and all that in the 80s with Sussman Lawrence and Peter Himmelman, who's a dear friend now, and I'm forgetting a million people. My own sister Linda had one of the first record deals out here on RCA back in the early 70s. And it continues to be a hotbed for music, which is really fun to see.
But just about the time you were in your early 20s graduating from high school, that hotbed of music kind of came into collision with the Mack truck of history, because Minneapolis for a time became this place that everybody in the world was aware of, and there was a Minneapolis sound, and I think Prince was responsible for it, but everybody else kind of became a part of that as well. Yeah. Everybody kind of started playing a little bit more like that sound, sure, and learned how to do that. And
tried to, anyway.
So
because a lot of them sucked at it.
But a lot didn't. Like you said, you didn't have a lot of direct interaction with Prince telling you play this, don't play that. But your music at a time definitely was part of that scene.
Oh, there's no doubt. But I say through him, we became part of that history, and we take ownership into that.
Yep.
And we are an extension of the originator of that. And we're influenced by a lot of folks. I'm influenced by my family. I'm influenced by him. I'm influenced by people who came before these guys, but it is all a melting pot into what was that time in the early mid '80s, and that really defined what we call the Minneapolis sound. And I think the Peterson family is part of that. I think the Steele family is part of that. I think Prince is part of that. I think the Prince's extended family are part of that. And it was definitely a sound that you and still cannot fake. You know, if you and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but some cats who want to come and play Minneapolis funk on guitar and they don't have that experience and they weren't in that scene, it's hard to replicate it. Let's just put it that way.
I've seen a video of you and Eric Leeds sitting at the soundboard talking about what is the funk and what isn't the funk, or mostly saying that's it, that's the Minneapolis funk.
Yeah.
Can you verbalize it without hearing an example of it? I mean, is there something? Is it a swagger? Is it a sensibility? What is it in the funk, the Minneapolis funk?
It's easier to play than it is to explain to you without an axe in my hand, but
yeah.
Certainly an extension of jazz, simply because it's a conversation and you have to listen, and we almost call it like the bubbling groove. So it's a lot more noise and percussion than it maybe is notes. It's more about feel and accents and ghost notes than it is how many licks can you play. Mm-hmm. It's more about the feel than it is how great you can articulate a line.
Yep.
It's more about the grease and those kind of things. I think that's the best way to explain it. Look for the holes, and that's where where you put your thing.
Well, it's interesting that you say it's a conversation too, because I do think, and you're a real practitioner and originator of this thing, is this interaction between what the bass is doing and the rhythm guitar is doing the synth is doing, and they're all doing these syncopated things, and there are specific grooves that the keyboard will do and the guitar will do and the bass will do, and the way they interlock with each other becomes in the same way that James's thing had.
Exactly. It's really an extension of that. It's just an updated version of that. I mean, if you want to go down history, down memory lane, you see what influenced Prince's whole thing, and it's James.
Yeah.
And Sly. Yeah. And those kind of people. And what he did was modernize it, emulate it.
And personalize it, though, dude.
Totally personalize. That's the word I was looking for. Absolutely.
Put his thing
on.
No doubt. This period that when you were in the family and you sang Nothing Compares to You, it's a big moment in history because, you were the first person to sing what became an iconic song of the 80s, and you were in this band that I think sort of solidified your place in the Minneapolis scene, in the Prince scene. Mm-hmm. What was the experience of being in the family like? What was that?
It was pretty cool, I gotta say. I mean, for a young kid to get the nod from the hottest artist on the planet, are you kidding me? That's a pretty cool place to be. And I don't think I've ever have taken that for granted, even though I left that situation. And to this day, I'll say it to his face, I have many, many times. I thank all those guys for what that is and what that opportunity was for my career. It was a launching pad for anything else I've done since.
At the time, he was a kind of impresario, A&R mastermind, artist, creator. He picked you out, and he picked some other musicians out, and Suzanne, and he said, I want to do a project with you guys.
He had vision for putting people together, and that is, I've never seen anything like it in my life. I mean, good producers do that in the studio, but he not only did it in the studio, he didn't have to, actually, he did it all himself, but he was able to do it visually. And how do you tell a story with these particular people? Who would be right for the story? And most importantly, what is the story? The Time had a story, Vanity 6, Apollonia 6, Des Dickerson, all these cats had stories. And he was able to not only tell them with different sounding music that still had that common thread, but he also was able to visualize it with, the marketing, the branding of the band.
When he approached you about it, did he say this is the idea?
Hell no. He wasn't. We didn't have a say really in what that was. Basically, he had heard me sing, and I still have never been able to ask him this to his face. But the only way that he could have heard me sing was when Morris and I would trade licks back and forth backstage at First Avenue, our dressing room separated from Prince by a curtain. And he'd try to sing a lick, and then I'd go, I'd outdo him or whatever the case would be, right? So we were having fun, just being knuckleheads. When Morris split the time, he sat us all in a circle and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a new band. And he pointed at me and said, you're going to be the lead singer. I was like, really? You don't say no to that. So he spent a week recording that record. Susanna knows more about it because she was dating him at the time and has a lot more insight on this. Basically, I would get tapes at my mom's house and have to learn his rough vocals as best as I could, becoming familiar with them. And then David Z would produce them, and Jelly Bean would sit by his side in this empty warehouse in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, which it doesn't exist anymore, but it was pretty incredible. And then once those things were done, he put Claire Fisher on there. See, but that all worked. I mean, and it was really incredible how that came together. And I'll never forget playing that record with Claire's arrangements for Billy in the parking lot. Billy's my brother. The parking lot of Felty's in downtown Minneapolis in the mid '80s. And I had the trunk open. It was late at night, and I've never seen my brother go crazy over music like that because it mixed the one note or one chord wonder, as we call it, the groove, the funk, with superimposed with harmony and musicality and lush, incredible arrangements of Claire, and it became a thing.
It's very interesting that Prince, who was capable of doing everything himself, one of the few things that consistently he started to farm out was these arrangements to Claire Fisher. It's a kind of a crazy, incredibly genius vision to understand that it's something that would work and then to allow it to be part of his sound. It's really far out.
I think that Susanna Melvoin, my partner in crime and the family in F Deluxe, was responsible for that because she would play him Shaka records and Rufus records or whatever. And you should do this on this. You should definitely get Claire to do this. And Claire Fisher, I think, was a friend of her father, Mike Melvoin, who's was a great jazz pianist in the LA area and part of the
Wrecking Crew.
Thank you. It was her encouragement and then it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the family was the first thing that he did.
This is kind of an out question, and it's probably not fair.
Bring it on.
But do you think that he would have been as receptive to that kind of input if it had come from another musician in the band, other than one that he happened to be dating at the time?
God, no one has ever asked me that. I have no idea. Probably not. Although she's smart and she's musical and she comes from an
family. Incredibly deep family. There's no question that whatever came out of her mouth was going to be interesting and well informed.
And it still is to this day.
But same of you, and that's the thing. I mean, most of the people I've talked about working with him sort of don't give me the impression that there was a lot of dialogue going on about what the music is.
There's no dialogue. There wasn't for me, anyway.
Considering there was no dialogue, or very little, what was it about being around him? What was the feeling of being around him?
It was really examining, from an insider point of view, why things worked. And I do it to this day. You analyze, why did he make these decisions? Why did he make these musical and visual decisions? And how did he construct these things? Is it in the instrumentation? Is it in the groove? Is it in the lyrics? Is it in the dress? Is it in all these different things like that? There is a plan for that. There's spontaneity within that plan, but there's a plan. So that's what he gave to me. He gave me an outline for what I thought success was at that time.
Yeah. So then you went on and you pursued your own personal success. And to me, as you know, I'm sure you've met other people. I know there are wonderful, innovative R&B musicians alive today that are deeply influenced by your solo records, and your first solo record in particular was a mother. It was really, I think, an extraordinary record. I still swear by that record.
Thank you, man. I had a lot of help.
So how did you go about? Because then you had to become a songwriter. You had to become an artist. All of that stuff.
It was trial by fire. Yeah, I had a lot of balls doing what I did. There's no question.
So describe to me what you did.
I left the most successful artist on the planet because I had enough ego built up in myself that I went, my family has been mentoring me for as long as I've been alive. I can do this. And then I jumped ship. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but basically that's really at its core. The question came up, do you believe in yourself enough to jump ship from the most successful person on the planet. I had the balls to say yes.
To leave Prince's camp and go it alone.
Ooh. Yeah, my family, some of them thought, what are you doing? They
Really?
did. Oh, sure. They're like, are you sure you're making the right decision here? I mean, let's put it into today's thing. I mean, I've got a kid who's 20. If she gets hooked up with,
Dr. Luke.
whomever, and then she does one record with him or in the middle of a record, and she goes, Daddy, I want to go, and I don't want to do this. I'd be like, are you out of your mind? So that question was asked, and I just forged ahead. And they wanted to hear some tracks, and I'll never forget sitting down writing Sensation, I Know You Too Well, Can't Believe We're Through, in Ricky's rented house in the basement, Andy Wilcox's 4 or 16 track, reel to reel, and these weird synthesizer sequencers at the time. I'd never done a record by myself, ever. No one taught me how to do any of that stuff, so I was like, ooh, I better go to school. So I went to school on how to record all that stuff, submitted my demo at that point in time, just to solidify my deal.
To MCA.
To MCA. And they signed me, and back in those days, it was a lot of money. And what did I do? I hired my brother. I'm like, help. So he helped me put together the record. We spent every single dime that we had. And, I think it was money well spent.
Yeah.
Because I love that record as well. Your rookie record out of the box, coming from a camp like that, I had something to prove. Now, even though it wasn't an incredible success sales-wise, I think musically it's a really sound record. I got to hire some fun cats like Sanborn and Hiram Bullock, and work with Monte Moir too.
Yeah.
He was part of that record.
Yeah.
Looking back, I'm proud of that record, man. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'm sure you've had a lot of moments in your life to reflect on why or why not that record didn't connect.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of my own speculation, and some of it may also just be
It
what
wasn't
happens.
the right time.
Yeah.
Or it was, what I have to get out of my head is the voices that say, maybe it sucked. Maybe it wasn't as good a record as I thought it was. And then you if you let that enter your head too much, then that's a bad place to go.
Well, you were, they call it blue-eyed soul, but you were a white guy singing very black-sounding music.
Oh yeah.
And
it wasn't fashionable at the time.
At that moment, it actually did become fashionable.
Big time.
If you looked at, certainly by the time Justin Timberlake came on the scene, you had to be looking at that going, man, I was 10 years too soon for that.
I was ahead of my time, damn it.
But it's interesting because the next record that you made, it seemed to me it shifted a little more towards the pop. And you said, I understand, I'm going to be a little more mainstream this time.
Yeah, and there enters what kind of music am I supposed to be making? Who am I making this for? I love that record, Stranger to Love and all that. Great pop R&B record. However, I made that more for my managers and his suggestion than I did for myself. Mm-hmm. And I understand why he made that suggestion, but I got lost for a very long time going, what the F kind of music am I supposed to be making here? And when you start doing that, then you go down the bad rabbit hole. I always made good music, I think, even if it was pop or whatever, but in my heart of hearts was I questioned what I was supposed to be doing. That was an interesting period of time for me.
Do you think there's still a Minneapolis sound?
I wouldn't be able to put my finger on what that would be. Maybe that's a question you should ask the next generation. They may have a better answer for you. Because, of course, when you say that, I think of, what I've done for years. But, I think the new up-and-coming scene is the hip-hop scene with the Rhymesayers and Doomtree and all those guys. And that's probably the Minneapolis sound now.
Yeah. I know that Questlove and D'Angelo are big fans of yours.
How crazy is
what does that feel like to you?
I'm warming up D'Angelo on a week from Sunday with my new band with Eric Leeds called LP Music. We're actually opening up. Ricky's going to be on the gig.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's wacky. It's really fun to have those guys as fans.
My understanding is they were fans of your solo records. Is that what they dug, or what did they
I think
dig?
that they were the bigger fans of the family record because they're Prince fanatics.
Yeah.
And anything that came out of there. But Questlove once said that it's one of his top 5 records that he loves.
I think I got to go more to school on that record. I don't think I put a lot of time in on that record. I put on way more time on your record.
Solo record.
Yeah.
It's Prince wrote some of his best funky / pop stuff, and his lyrics on Screams of Passion.
Yeah.
They're beautiful poetry, man. I mean, that's his stuff. I think that's where he was best. Some of his best Prince songs are on the family record. You should check it out.
I think I have to. I feel a little bit.
I'll send you a little present.
I'll go.
You can't buy it. That's the problem.
Yeah. So what do you now to bring it full circle? Here you are. One of the things that you do is you teach. I mean, it's a big gig for you, and you are helping bring new players and new producers along. And the world is a different place than it was when you got started, and even when you did get started, it was you're a perfect example of somebody who went into the machinery of the business, stepped up right to the edge, didn't become a superstar.
Right.
In order to have a career in music, you've had to constantly be thinking about what the opportunities are and be smart about it. And how do you advise young players today, or young people that want to get into this business? Do you think there's a place for a career in music like there was 20 years ago?
It's just different. That's all. I mean, I think that read the book Who Hid My Cheese? I think that's the name of it. But it's just a matter of where is the money now.
Yeah.
And the money will find you if you're doing good work, man. If you're a good hang, you're doing good work, and you're making yourself available and known, the work will find you. And I keep telling this to all my students. You got to be out there. You got to be hanging. You got to be networking. But it's a given that you should be incredibly talented. It's a given. The rest of it is the hard work. But the hard work, the networking part of it should be fun. It can't paralyze you. But as far as advice goes, I would say, man, the biggest blessing for me throughout my career has been diversification. It's one day I'm a writer. Next day I'm conducting big bands. The next day I'm playing rock and roll with my stupid brothers.
But the cool thing is it's diverse, but it all has a sort of a certain point of view. I mean, you're always you. I don't think you probably... I've certainly never heard you play anything and thought, boy, he really is trying to pretend he's somebody else. You know what I mean?
Well, thank God for that. If I'm going to suck at it, I'll hire somebody better than me that will enhance the whatever we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I've learned that lesson. I've put myself in situations where I shouldn't have been and learned from it.
St. Paul Peterson, anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, except for that it's so great to sit in a room with you for more than 30 seconds.
I know it.
But the last time, we only get to see each other when it's, when we're in a hurry or doing business or it's rushed. So we have to do this again.
Paul Peterson on the Minneapolis Sound, working with Prince and ultimately deciding to go it alone. I'd like to now turn your attention to Ricky Peterson. This is Paul Peterson's older brother. In fact, the theme song, the music that we hear every week on The Third Story, features Ricky playing organ on an album that I made with my father and Ricky's older brother, Billy Peterson. It was my dad's 2015 release, Blue Camus. So we're listening to Ricky in the background right now. Ricky Peterson was a true contemporary of Prince's. They were the same age, and they grew up very aware of one another. They started jamming together in high school, and in the mid-1990s, Ricky ended up doing quite a bit of production with Prince and for Prince at Paisley Park Studios, for Paisley Park Records. Ultimately, he produced the Prince hit, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. Here, Ricky and I talk about how Minneapolis affected the music and how the music affected Minneapolis. Minneapolis became known eventually as Prince's town. And
Prince and Terry and Jimmy and all that, and they had the Minneapolis Sound, which is essentially, I would say, 75% true, maybe, because they had a sound coming out of Minneapolis that sounded like James Brown. That sounded like, it was James Brown meets Sly Stone, and only with their take on the lyrics and different little quirky, like Prince, to me, had his own way, his own artistry that he put on the twist on those grooves is what made that thing happen. But before Prince, there was Steve Greenberg, who did Funky Town.
Yeah.
Now that was supposedly the Minneapolis sound at the time, and that's what that kind of a claim to fame that he's got, that he started it.
Sure.
And that's really, I don't even know what the heck that is. I don't know what that is actually. I think when people refer to the Minneapolis sound, they always look to Prince and Terry and Jimmy. And Terry and Jimmy, they were just North Side boys that all hung out with Prince. You know, they all had a certain thing that they liked, which is a 4 on the floor, guitar-oriented, funky, synthy, that sound.
Well, so that's interesting because, I mean, I agree with you. That is, it's very related to James Brown. And also Funky Town, I mean, I never thought about it before, but he did a lot of the same things that Prince would do later, using female voices interacting with male voices,
right.
synth and guitar. I mean, that's a little more disco-y to me, I think.
Well, that was total disco.
Yeah.
That was a total disco groove. I think it was geared for that. He did that as a tongue-in-cheek thing, totally as a tongue-in-cheek thing with a 4 on the floor and just one little guitar part, and
that's right.
Boop, boop, and the synthesizer.
And that synth lick, too, though.
Yeah.
So from your point of view, though, one of the things I think that was associated with the Minneapolis sound was that there was a strong use of synths as well. Mm-hmm. And, you were a synth
I was
player.
a part of that. I was a part of that scene.
Yeah.
Because I was one of the first guys in Minnesota to have synthesizer. I was definitely the first guy to have a mini Moog that we knew of, and then it was the Poly Moog, then it was the Prophet, then it was, and I wasn't a big Oberheim guy because I liked the fact that I could manipulate the Moog synthesizers because I knew how to run them,
I remember you as Prophet, DX when I met you,
right,
and mini Moog.
Yep, that's exactly right. Those
were
are my
kind of
favorite.
go-tos,
Yeah. So what did I have set up? I had B3, clavinet, Rhodes, Polymoog, Mini Moog. That was my setup back then. And that was in the Doug Maynard band, TC Jammers. Yeah. Back when we were playing funky-ass music, that when those guys came out to hear us, Prince, Jesse Johnson, those guys came to hear us play music.
And check you out.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me that you jammed with Prince early on when you were both teenagers, or he was at least.
Well, we're both the same age.
Yeah, so
but when he was starting to do his thing, because I remember when he was in Sound 80 doing his For You record. That was his first record, and he and David Rifkin were in one of the Studio B or whatever, and I was there hanging with Billy. I think I was working on a thing with Herb Pillhofer, who owns Sound 80. Well, those guys were in there, and I met him. I had a friend of mine by the name of Jimmy Bowman, who was a very dear friend of my father's father. His name was Jimmy Bowman. Great keyboard player, and those guys went golfing together. So his kid, Jimmy, knew Prince and was hanging out with these guys all the time. He said, "I'm going to bring you along, man." And we went over to Prince's house, and we sat down, and then we started jamming. I just went downstairs, and it was just a complete groovy, fun time, and that kind of scene. Yeah. And I remember after I did that a few times, I think they had moved from that place to Dell's Tire Mart, which was right off of 35W and right on the university around that area. And we'd go in there and jam, And then we went back to his house, and these guys, we'd go there and whatever. We'd get high or whatever. Not Prince, whatever. We'd go over there kind of hang out and do whatever. And I remember Owen Husney is the guy's name. That was Prince's manager at the time. Prince and he took me into the living room of Prince's house at that time off of France Avenue and said, "Do you want to come and play with us?" And I remember the red flag that came up.
Which was what?
Which was, this is what you can't do. You can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't do. They were putting up,
Even then.
But that, not saying that he didn't do any of that stuff. It's just, this is what you can't do, and that was the red flag for me. I just went, well, wait a minute now. First of all, I know what it entails for me. I'm going to have to play his music, and he's going to show me what to play on the keyboards. And I'm like, nah, I don't think I can do that. And that's why I turned him down. Not that I didn't dig him. I totally dug what we were doing. It was great. But it had nothing to do with music. I mean, we weren't like doing his music. We were jamming, and having fun.
When you were hanging with him.
Yes.
Well, years later, you ended up doing some work for him at Paisley Park.
I did. Purple Rain gathered all the money for Prince, man. He built Paisley Park. And I'll never forget when he was on tour, he invited me to come back to Paisley Park because I saw him. I came to Chicago to see him. I saw him in Chicago and I saw him in Jersey. And I was backstage. I had backstage passes because all those guys were my friends, you know, and I would go out.
Bobby Z.
And
Fink.
Matt Fink, thank you. Anyways, those guys would always get me tickets. And I'm backstage, and he's in his little golf cart, you know, and running around backstage. Hey, Ricky, how you doing? And so we kind of reconnected ourselves. And he says, man, you got to come over. Let's go hang out at Paisley Park. So I ended up going over there. And I'll never forget, man, it kind of developed from that area, you know, from me doing the Sanborn thing and then Steve Miller.
So you had your own career behind you when you reconnected
with him. Absolutely that. And then it just turned into, I would go over there and kind of hang out, and then we ended up doing a little deal because I started doing some music for him. I mean, it seriously was The Most Beautiful Girl is one of the first things I ever did with him and for him.
And he had, at that point, he was no longer with the Revolution. Now it was the New Power Generation.
New Power Generation at that time.
And all
exactly right. And what happened with that is that once he heard what I did, but with Tom and Tom Tucker was a huge part of that with me because Tom and I worked together all the time
as an engineer.
And he was and producer, whatever. And he and I were in there doing stuff together all the time because I would hire things. You know, hire the studio to do a bunch of stuff. So Prince eventually went, well, that sounds pretty darn good, because he'd poke his head in, you know. And that's how we got Most Beautiful Girl. He handed me this turd and said, polish it. Not really. It was a great song. But it was so different from what you hear now. You know?
And you just were given free reign to
to do everything. And
so that's an unusual thing for Prince, because he's so known as being so hands-on.
Hands-on and don't touch it. And it's all mine. Yes, it was the first time. Besides, David Z helped him with Kiss.
Yeah.
You know, Kiss was a song that David Z was doing for another band that Prince heard and went, no, I want that.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. That's how Kiss came out. And David Z had done that whole... It was all done by the Gates, and it was an acoustic guitar just doing it from a hi-hat pattern. That's when you didn't have a sequencer. We could make things sequence. We're using a gate.
But it's funny because those tools really did impact things. Like I think when the Lin 9000 came out, like it had a total effect on the way you guys were working.
Absolutely, man. Besides it breaking down constantly and erasing what we did for hours on end, programming the son of a gun. We did so much work on that Lin 9000, man. We did everything on it. Of course, that was a sequencer also. So then we could have a sequencer.
You ended up getting this gig working with Prince at Paisley, and did you ever think about moving out away from Minneapolis, especially when you got all that session work in the 80s and 90s?
I have to tell you, the reason why I didn't is because I didn't have to. I was able to work, and those guys were hiring me. They were flying me out to California to do all the sessions, flying me to New York to do all the sessions, and doing stuff like that because I had a certain thing. That's how that worked, man. I didn't have to leave. No, I never wanted to leave Minneapolis, you know. I was on the road constantly anyway, so that was a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to go to California and run that game. I'm a lazy son of a bitch, that's why. I really didn't want to do it, man.
I asked everybody in Minneapolis, your brother too, Paul, and it just, no, I didn't want to. And it's just so funny.
Did. We were very fortunate, man, to be able to do what we're doing and stay in Minneapolis, man, because we were part of that scene. We're part of the Minneapolis sound.
Yeah.
I was producing Prince stuff. Then I went on to do a bunch of stuff for Paisley Park Records after that,
Yeah.
And Paul was able to do it with me, and why would we want to go anywhere else?
When you describe the scene in Minneapolis, it seems so local to me in the sense that everybody sort of knew each other. They kind of knew each other's families. The guy that you had been a friend of your father's, his son brought you around. There was this real multi-generational. People kind of know each other because it's a smaller community.
Exactly right, and it's comfortable. It's very comfortable, man, and that's a big part of it, you know. And why people come and flocked around us too, because it was comfortable, and we made everybody feel good, man. It wasn't like, cracking whips. It was having fun. It was all about having fun. And that's my motto. I'm not going to do it if it's not going to be any fun. Then. It's not that we're partying. It's about having fun at what you do and what you do best, and why you're put on this earth.
Hey, man. Your solo synthesizer approach with the pitch bend thing, other people do it still today, but the way you did it is pretty specific. I know I've heard a few other people over the years do it in the choice of notes and the way you did it. Do you feel like you affected the way people approached it?
I tried to be. I wouldn't know that, But I tried to do it my way. My influence, I'll tell you exactly who my influence was George Duke and Jan Hammer. Those guys approached it like a guitar, like a bending like a guitar, and I thought that was the coolest thing I ever heard in my life. So I approached it that way, but threw in my own little routine with it, but tried to make it as funky as possible.
Yeah.
But George was the master of that shit to me, man.
Are you careful about doing that today because people associate some of those sounds with it?
Pretty much.
And so you feel like it sort of
ages you out? I kind of used it up a little bit, back in the days on my records and stuff, and I had the same sounds because I love those sounds. I do it. I still do it today with Sanborn, of course, when I play like flute solos or something like that. I always like that chippy flute sound, And I remember getting shit for doing that, man. I can't remember who said, "You still using that same sound, man?" That's it. Yeah, motherfucker. That's exactly right.
But that's what's funny to me is like I have your production approach was so influential to me. I was just going so hard to school on you guys when I was coming up.
I love it. I love that. That's very fun. That's flattering, man. Thank you. I love you. Thanks man.
Ricky.
Okay, man. Good. Very cool.
Ricky Peterson on the Minneapolis experience and working with Prince. I love when Ricky said, Minneapolis was comfortable. It's just comfortable. Why should we leave? These guys don't want to leave. I think that's so incredible. It's one of the few cities that produces so much talent that doesn't want to leave. I think in so many other markets, there's an understanding that when you get to a certain level, you would leave. You would go to LA, you would go to New York, you would go to Nashville, whatever it is. But in Minneapolis, a lot of the great creators of the area didn't want to leave. They stayed and they set up shop. Prince, of course, also Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, who came up in these interviews already. Two other contemporaries of Prince's who went on to do incredible work. They went on to produce Janet Jackson and write and produce countless hits for a lot of R&B artists. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were the original members of the band The Time, along with keyboard player Monte Moir. I spoke to Monte last summer as well and got a sense from him of what the really early days in the Prince camp and The Time were like. I love when Monte says, "We took his vision and his ability to think anything was possible. That's what we took from him." And finally, I guess I just want to say, check out who these guys were. These are some local dudes. I mean, Minneapolis is a very small scene. It's a contained scene, and you get the sense that these were real people. They were real Midwestern, very unambitious in a lot of ways. Monte goes on to say in this interview, we never really had it in us to try to go get a record deal. I mean, why would we do that? We would rather just go get another gig. Prince was the person that turned them on to a bigger way of thinking about the world. Here's our final interview of the day, keyboardist, composer, and producer Monte Moir.
So what were you doing in the late 70s in Minneapolis?
The late 70s, I was probably playing in Flight Time. The core of us became The Time.
What was the music sounding like at that time?
We were doing straight-up cover R&B songs of the day, pretty much. Second time around, Shalimar, One in a Million, Larry Graham, George Benson. I guess we did a few standards. We did a little dinner set for a while.
Was there a sense of leadership in that band? Were Jimmy and Terry the leaders of the band?
Jimmy wasn't in the band at that point, but Terry was always a leader, yeah.
And it was mixed-race band always, huh?
Pretty much, mostly black, but it was... When I was there, we had a white guitar player and me, and the rest of the guys were black. But we had a smaller version at that point. So I know a few years before that, they had a huge horn section and they had the whole deal. They were doing
So when you joined it was an established thing?
Yeah. I was there about the last year and a half before we turned into The Time. Cynthia Johnson was singing with us for a while, Funky Town. Sue Ann Carwell, Alexander O'Neill.
This is a period in Minneapolis where the musicians are here, the stage is set, there's a very sophisticated group of players, and Prince has not really broken out of Minneapolis at this point.
He was just starting. He was, I think when I was in Flight Time, I think his first record was out. No, actually, I think his second record was out. But he hadn't had any kind of mainstream thing yet. He was just strictly R&B guy, kind of moving up through the ranks pretty quickly. Remember when I first met him, we were playing at the Riverview Supper Club over north, and we were kind of the house band there 3-4 nights a week, and they said, "Oh, Prince is coming tonight," and he shows up, and so we sat in and we the only song we played, he's like, here, I want you to, you know, here, hit this on the one, and it was basically like 1-4-5, you know, just bam. And we ended up playing Head. Huh. And it was me and Bean and Prince and maybe Terry, I suppose. You know, we just went for it, and it was kind of fun, but it was just kind of funny that the first song would be that song.
Yeah, right. Well, I guess that's part of what I'm wondering is, you know, he seemed like such a freak of nature when he emerged and when the world first saw him, but what came right behind him was this whole wave of music and attitude coming out of Minneapolis. I sort of feel like a lot of it was already ready for it, and here already there was a lot of R&B coming out of Minneapolis at the time, a lot of great players. What was the music like before Prince broke, and how do you think it changed when he did start to break through?
Well, I know for us, it was hard to get gigs around town for Flight Time because of the. I'll tell you one. I don't remember the club, but Terry was trying to get into some club, and they said, "We love you guys, but I'm a little uncomfortable because you got too many black people in the band." So we ended up playing a lot of universities, and there was this little club called the Nakarima over on Portland, which was owned by a couple, and it was just this great little place we'd play for quite a bit, actually. So we were fairly limited in the amount of places we could play, but there was a lot of music going on. There's always been a lot of music in this town.
Yeah, why do you think that is? What is it about Minneapolis that creates so many sophisticated musicians?
You know, I don't know. I really don't know. But it's across the board, too, you know. You go back historically. I mean, we've got the Dylans and then in the 80s, R&B, you know, well, Prince pretty much opened up single-handedly the whole R&B. You know, he paved the way for us, obviously, and a lot of folks. And then it got to be a point where it did get to be a hot spot, and people were coming in here signing everybody. Probably maybe signing too many people, because it was, you know, not everybody panned out so well. But you know, it's always a crapshoot, so who knows, but...
So do you remember when Prince came on the scene, how it affected Flight Time and how that became the time?
Yeah, I remember we were doing a demo with Steve Weiss. I had just gotten in the band out of Creation, and I had just gotten into the band, and they'd recorded 3 songs, I think, and so I put a few things on a couple of songs. And I remember Terry saying, you know, well, Prince has always told us as soon as he makes it, he's going to come back and get us.
Why was that already established? What was their relationship like with Prince?
Well, they'd grown up together, Northside. Jelly Bean, our drummer from the time, has known Prince since he was 12 years old, and Morris too as well. I don't know. I guess just the bond that they all had. But you know, the story goes is the time became to be. Morris had written a song called "Party Up," or written the groove to "Party Up," and Prince said, "I want the song, so either I'll give you some money or I'll help you start a band." And so Morris said, "Let's start a band." So they started recording songs, which became part of the First Time record. So they had started a lot of it, and then it was basically, we need to get a band together because we're going to go hit the road. And that's when Morris started calling around and called me and called Terry and whoever else. Jimmy, I guess Jimmy was in the band by that point too, so Jimmy Jam.
Did your keyboard playing approach change based on hearing what Prince was playing on the tracks and having to kind of voice things differently, or get hip to certain synth things because that's how he was playing them, or was everybody kind of playing that way already?
No, it was a lot of what he was doing, because he was doing the whole synth horn thing, which became really quite a big deal for a while in R&B, you know, instead of using real horns. And I don't know what this decision behind that, but I suppose it's, you know, it just became a thing. And so that aspect, yeah, and programming keyboards, because we ended up using Oberheim's OB8s for almost all those records, and that just became the signature sound, really. So it was more about, and that band is parts. It's all, you know, it's not really playing, but it's da 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 da, and you got, you know, it is what it is. So it can get a little tedious at times, but it also makes it what it is.
So what did it feel like when the time became like a real thing and became known throughout the world and part of the Prince experience?
It was quick, crazy, pretty exciting ride, because I don't think anybody, including Prince, expected much to happen. This was just a side project of his, and I think it was, you know, he's so prolific, he's like, you know, he's always recording. He said, well, let's throw this together. And he brought it into Warner Brothers, put the tape on the table, and walked out, he said. And even Warner Brothers, I don't think, expected too much. There was a DJ in Detroit called Mojo, and he basically broke us. He played Get It Up, which was the first single for, I think, 2 weeks without telling anybody who it was. And so, of course, all this, it's got to be Prince. Well, it doesn't quite sound like Prince. Who, got to be this big hype, and it broke out of Detroit, and from there it just went, at least through the R&B world,
And Prince was writing most of the songs?
Yeah, back then, yeah. That was part of the demise of the band, I think, because there was all these promises that everybody was going to get more involved, and but he was just cutting left and right, and he wrote some great stuff, and it still holds up. We still play today, so it's still playing the same stuff.
And what does that feel like to be out there, and what does it feel like to go out and play those tunes again, or still?
It's fun, People ask us to get old, and I say, well, sometimes playing the songs get a little old, but because it's just parts, for the most part. But the phone keeps ringing, and people still call, and occasionally we get back on TV. We did Jimmy Kimmel earlier this year. Then that always gives us a shot in the arm. Or Prince will bring us out occasionally, do some shows, and the train keeps rolling somehow. And so we do 40, 50 dates a year probably, and weekend stuff, and we come home and work on our stuff, and everybody's grateful for what's going on. So that's great.
So it's a gig. It's a real gig.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We started up in '97, I think, just thinking we were going to do a couple of gigs. And this wasn't all the originals. It was just a lot of the guys we still have with us, and a couple of gigs is 20 years later, or whatever that is.
And you told me that Prince owns the name. He owns the trademark of the time.
The time, yeah.
Does he kind of keep tabs on what the show looks like and what it is, or you guys have free reign to do what you want to do?
I don't think he has any say over what we're doing, but I think there's always an interest. He's always, for a guy that is at the status and what he does, it's amazing how much he keeps up with things around him, to the point where it's just, I know some guys in his band, and he's like, he knows, he watches everybody, he knows what's going on. And
somebody at the Dakota, waitress at the Dakota last night, said that last year when he did this string of shows at the Dakota, at the club, he said the whole band and his whole entourage was on extremely careful behavior. And as soon as he left the room, maybe they'd have a drink, they'd loosen up a little bit, they'd let their guard down. But everybody was being real careful with him around, He's watching them.
That's typical. Yeah, because he writes the checks, and if he says he doesn't want you around, there doesn't need to be a reason. It just, he's always kind of been that way. But I think that's where he, with the time, we were always good buddies as far as the band, and so we were just hanging. We were a bunch of young kids just having a good old time, and I think a part of that, he didn't like that, because I think he felt that. Where he used to tell Morris that, well, in order to have a band, you got to be cracked down, and Morris is like, we're all friends. We don't need to be like that. So there was always a rub that way, but that's his way, and he's done pretty good with it.
Yeah, it's the time is such an interesting thing when you think about it, right? Because it is its own entity. And as you say, you guys are still out there playing a lot of tunes that Prince essentially wrote and assembled. They're associated with you. There is a kind of a secondary Prince, like by going to see the time, you're kind of going to see Prince in a way, or a Prince thing.
Yeah.
And yet Morris also has his own star and his own cult of personality, and has his own shtick and his own, way of performing that's totally, memorable and identifiable, but it's an unusual situation, it is for everybody involved,
and it always has been, because I think it's not a band per se, and I think it took some of us a little time to figure that out, because I guess it, but you just think we're a band. Of course we're a band. We're talked about as a band, but it was never set up as a band. Contractually it was never set up as a band. And the fact that he does own the rights to the songs doesn't mean we can go necessarily take them and do a best of record. That gets into him with Warner Brothers, and it's kind of this convoluted thing. And the touring version is the touring version can do whatever it wants. We could go out and do our own records and stuff, but we just haven't done that so far. But
does he get a piece of the shows?
No.
So he just owns the name so that it can't be exploited in any serious way without him being aware of it.
I mean, we were talking last night, and all the originals, which we did a record back in '08, and we wanted him involved, and wanted to use the name, of course, and he was going to be involved. In fact, he was on some stuff that we had recorded, and then he decided he didn't want to be a part of it and didn't want to be, the name used and all that, and that was that. And so we either go to litigation for 3 years, or you say, well, because from what I understood, it was a pretty gray area. Yes, he might own the name, but we've been performing under the name for all these years, so we're, it's this whole, but I don't think anybody wanted to.
Well, what's funny to me is that at the core of it are a bunch of guys that went to high school together or grade school together. And so you've got these dynamics that are playing out with real money attached to them, and careers and lives and fans and hits and all this stuff. But at the core of it is a bunch of dudes that basically knew each other from when they were kids, and those dynamics are essentially in place since then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's too bad because there always could have been a lot more going on with that had there not been the agendas or the control or the... Prince always wanted to create a mini Motown out at Paisley. He talked about it. But you've got to let people do what they do to get some of that going. And he had such a vice grip on everything that, it just kind of squashed people's ability to do too much.
Your experience of being in the studio with him, is a different energy being in the studio with Prince than being in the studio with other... there's a lot of multi-instrumentalist, talented producers, writers that you've come into contact with. How is it different being in the room with Prince?
He has an aura about him. When he walks in a room, you feel it. Or if he walks on stage, when he used to come up and jam with us or something, it's like the whole stage lifts up about 1.5 feet, because there's something going on with him that's not the normal human being walking around, and it's... I don't know if that's a good way to describe it or not, but everybody's... It's like, we better let's do this, But he's one of the few people I'd say he's truly a genius. I mean, he's a sponge. He's got this uncanny ability to take anything he's listened to, put it in a pot, and spit it out in his own way. But you can hear the influences from the James Brown, the Hendrix, Sly Stone. I mean, you hear it, but it's him, and he's really got a vision that's beyond. Not only musically, but, marketing.
But in terms of, it's interesting hearing you say just everything changes in the room when he walks in. So it's not necessarily that he says anything to you or that he expects anything specific. It's just that his presence in the room changes the way the music gets made and the atmosphere.
I think it can, yeah.
When my dad interviewed musicians about what it was like to work with Miles Davis, and he asked them, well, what did you learn from working with Miles? The answer among almost all of the musicians was, I learned essentially that I had to be myself, that it was okay to be myself, and that I had to be myself. I don't think that's the same takeaway that people got from working with Prince. I think they got a different message, which was that you needed to be what he needed you to be.
For sure, but I think what we took away from him is his vision and his ability to basically think anything is possible. And he would say, we're going to do this. And we're like, huh? What? And we would do it. He would somehow make it happen. We'd rehearse 6 days a week, 6-7 hours a day to go play the first tour we did. We played 30 minutes. We opened up for him. We had 30 minutes, and we probably rehearsed for 6 months to do this. 6 days a week.
What effect did that have on the show?
Oh, it was incredibly tight. It was just rock solid tight. I mean, because, we're just going down picking hairs after a while. Okay, what else can we do? Well, you can turn your head this way during, whatever, but so we had all these kind of things where everybody's kind of moving dancing wise. I mean, or you're doing steps, or there's something going on here while there's something going on there, and we only had 6 songs in the first record, so we're basically playing the first record. It was just crazy, but it was just
Was Prince watching it, or is it you guys? You got so much time on your hands, you just sort of developed it?
No, he was with us, helping us develop the whole thing. Because he was invaluable. Because he said, "I can show you a lot of things that I had to learn I had the long way around." And for instance, like if Jesse Johnson's over here having taken a guitar solo on the left side of the stage, you guys should be over here on the right side doing some steps or just something, so that the people always have something visually to look at. So it was a really high impact, always a lot of things going on throughout the 30 minutes. I think we got to 45 minutes by the second tour, and it was excruciating in some ways to do this, but at the same time we saw the results. Rolling Stone once called us the funkiest band in America. It was just like, really?
Do you still do that on the show today? Do you still have all those moves?
Oh, we do a lot, some of the similar things, but we can't rehearse like we used to for many reasons. We got guys all over the country basically, and just the cost of doing it, is prohibitive. And
I started out by asking you what the scene was like here and what Flight Time was like before Prince came in and what kind of music you played and stuff. I think that everybody in town that worked with Prince somehow figured out how to catch up or get a piece of it, and I just wonder how much musically changed, because it seemed like there were all these bands and all these producers and all these people in Minneapolis who maybe had worked with Prince or were working with him or hadn't but wanted to or wanted to sound like they were. And there was a real common conception of what a track sounded like, how it was built, what the drums sounded like you said, the synth brass stuff, It's like everybody in town just sort of like got on board, or a lot of people did, and sort of started writing in that mode. Do you think that was the Minneapolis sound before he got here, or do you think that he changed the Minneapolis sound?
I think there were some elements floating around like that, but he was a large part of it, honestly, as far as that particular sound. But no, I think there was, as you said, there's tons of musicians around here, and I think, whether he did it directly or indirectly, he opened the doors for a lot of folks in this town. But,
the other thing that you say is that he elevated everybody, because by seeing him, by being in the room with the genius, everybody in town, there was all this talent here already, and they had the chance to be in a room and see what his work ethic was, how global he thought about a show and a song and imaging and branding and production. And on every level, it raised the stakes for a lot of people.
For sure. You got to think, back in the early 80s, you had to go into a recording studio to make a demo.
Mm-hmm.
There was a few guys might have a 4-track reel-to-reel. If they were really lucky, they might have an 8-track reel-to-reel. But the consensus was you would do something at home, and then you'd save up enough money to go into a recording studio, record a demo, and shop that to a record label. We would talk about, we should do a demo, or yeah, but what are we going to do with that? There is kind of that ceiling that people think, that'd be really neat, but how do you do that? It's not going to happen. We ought to concentrate on getting another gig out at Lord Fletcher's or something. I think it was just, and I think Prince did open this up to no, you can do this stuff.
As I'm thinking about it, I think there must have been something pretty special also about the Minneapolis environment that allowed for these mixed race bands. It just occurred to me, even before you mentioned it, that it was hard to get gigs sometimes because there were so many black people in the band. But the scene that Prince came out with was a mixed scene. There was a sense of integration in the visual presentation of the bands.
I think that was a very conscious statement on his part. But I also think a little bit of the Sly Stone thing in there. He had a pretty mixed band. I think he really liked that idea.
And have women in the band too.
Yeah. And it was interesting to have, at least back then, the black population in Minnesota was something like 7%. So, when you think about a mixed band with that small of a population, that's even more interesting.
You're right. Monty, anything else you want to say? This has been really enlightening.
It's been fun. I'm glad you had me come down and do this.
Thanks, man.
Well, there you have it. Paul Peterson, Ricky Peterson, and Monte Moir, 3 intense practitioners of the Minneapolis sound, all 3 sharing their experiences working with Prince. If you like this episode and you'd like to hear other similar kinds of conversations, please visit third-story.com, where you can subscribe, sign up. You can listen to previous episodes there, hang out, look at the pictures and comments. You can also go to the iTunes store and subscribe there, or wherever you get your podcasts, really. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.